In the following panel called How Far Has Your Data Traveled?, the speakers will discuss personal data in travel, where the risks are, and how to mitigate them. Please welcome our experts on data security, Daniel Tobuk, the CEO of Cytelligence, Inc., Matthew Paul, the Senior Director of Technology and Management at Best Western International, and Devin Smibert, the Director of Cybersecurity at WestJet. Please help me welcome them to the stage, and thank you.
Good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be here this morning. Just by a show of hands, who reads the news when it comes to cyber events around the world and Canada? Okay. We have about, I think, about 20% that raise their hands and about 20% that are too shy to admit it. So thank you very much for joining our panel today. We have two amazing guests and experts from the industry that are going to discuss some particular topics in relation to cybercrime, how it affects the travel industry, what can be done. But the fun part of the panel will be about us busting some myths around that everybody hear about. In a recent survey, 85% of CEOs in the travel industry have basically named cyber as one of the biggest threats to business interruption in the travel industry. Cyber has gone through quite an interesting revolution over the past 5 to 8 years due to its effects on travel, from disturbing travelers, theft of data, and impact on revenues. So it definitely has become one of the big topics in discussions in the boards and the executive committees. I would like to introduce the panels. Again, Matthew Paul. Matthew, if you can give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Hi, I'm Matthew Paul. I work for Best Western Hotels and Resorts. As Dorothy mentioned, we have over 16 brands in our over 100 countries. I've been with them for about 5 years, and I oversee infrastructure and cybersecurity.
Thank you very much. And we have Devin Smibert. If you can tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Certainly. I joined WestJet a little over a year ago now, and prior to that, I've spent my entire career in cybersecurity in various different industries, starting off in the defense sector, moved on into consulting roles, financial sector, oil and gas, high tech, and then my first time at an airline.
Got it. Thank you very much. Very cool. So we're going to have a very interesting perspective today. I've spent the last 22 years in forensics and cybercrime, chasing ghosts around the world between international and global borders. So this conversation is going to get very interesting here today. Guys, so let's get right into it in terms of privacy, loyalty, and traveler expectation. You know, from one side in the industry, there's this expectation that when you travel, wherever you check in, airlines, hotels, car rentals, everybody have your data, but yet we all have expectation of privacy and security. What are your thoughts about that? Let's start with Matthew.
You know, it's very true. I mean, as you travel, you know, the concept of experiences is something that, you know, is always thrown around. And when you show up at that desk, you expect that they know where you're coming from, where you're going to, all the details, but yet as a consumer, you also have that expectation of privacy. And it's a very delicate balance that, you know, we weigh every day when it comes to how are we going to share that data with those partners, what data do they need, what data don't they need, and then with the ever-changing compliance initiatives, things like GDPR and, you know, how you can share that data, it's a never-ending challenge, but it's very interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, with the recent Marriott breaches that has been very public out there and everybody asking questions, you know, Devin, what are your opinions about that? What are the expectations? Mm-hmm. Are they realistic?
Well, so I would say that our guests tend to be in a state of cognitive dissonance. So they've heard in the news about how there have been multiple breaches where their personal information has made it out into the wild, been sold. Some people have been the victim of identity theft as a result of it. So they don't want anyone to have their data, while at the same time they expect this hyper-personalized experience where they expect to be greeted at the door by name. They expect to be greeted by name at their seat with perhaps a statement of, we're sorry that you were delayed on your last flight in from LaGuardia. Here's a free drink. So I think that there's a lack of understanding in a lot of travelers today that it's actually a very complex problem to solve. And so I think a lot of people around the room are going to need to work with some interesting technology partners and figure out how do you protect that data while allowing all of those fancy analytics and making that information available to your frontline workers. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, with the expectation that you need to know everything about me, and like you said, greet me with a smile, no matter what the service that I'm using. But yet we also have an expectation that my data is always secure, encrypted, and you can get to it in a second. Those are very difficult things to accomplish.
My favorite story for this was, so a new piece of legislation rolled out in the EU called the General Data Protection Regulation last May. And so we actually had a guest who booked their flight. They were supposed to travel a couple months later and then submitted a request to us to have all of their information forgotten. So I think people, they understand that information should be kept private and that they have a right to have their information deleted, but they don't necessarily understand what the implications are if you do wipe all their data.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Literally every other day, there's a new breach, a new compromise that is being public globally. Is it fair to say that we should not be in a state that, yes, okay, somebody else got breached, oh, my information was lost. What is the travel industry doing? What is their point of view when it comes to compromises and how to handle them? You can go to Paul.
You go.
Yeah, certainly I can touch on that. I recently developed a timeline of the airline industry breaches over the course of 2018, and I won't name names, but it was literally at least one a month. It seemed there was some new breach in the news, and I'd say that anyone who believes that they can 100% protect a system or that they're impervious to breach, they're sorely mistaken. But what I believe travelers can expect, and what is becoming accepted with new privacy regulations, is that people in the travel industry, any other corporations, should take reasonable measures to protect data and to limit the scope of a breach. So you look at the recent numbers of records that have been breached. In some cases, you've got millions or hundreds of millions of accounts where people's passwords, their passport number, their home address, all of this information has been disclosed. And those are cases where companies haven't taken the right measures to limit access to the data or to mask information.
Absolutely.
It was in the news last year, WestJet, we had an attack against our loyalty platform through what's called a credential stuffing attack. Probably every airline and every person in this room has had that happen to their loyalty program. But because we mask the information of your passport, your Nexus card, your credit card, all that personal information, the amount of data that the attackers were able to get was very limited. So I think that that's what you're going to see more and more of over time, is you can limit the damages with the right security controls.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I mean, in the end of the day, we can't control the threat actors. I mean, it's become a real sport out there that we're going to get to into a second. You can't guarantee that you will never be breached or compromised. Really, the steps that every organization needs to think about is when that moment happens, when that event occurs, how can we limit the impact? You know, can we have our data encrypted? Can we have it masked? And maybe we don't want to even have it available on one particular system, making it harder for the bad guys. So this is really where we're going in our industry. Matthew, just going back to you with the introduction of the privacy legislation, just echoing what Devin said, we have GDRP, which has become a big play in industry. But here in Canada, as of November 2018, we have the mandatory breach notification, really our first step in the right direction, I believe, in reporting any type of known compromises or a breach. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's very important that when these events happen, that notification occurs, because quite often, whether it be credential stuffing, where you have the threat actors grabbing groups of credentials and attempting to leverage those against other loyalty programs, it's just like WestJet, Best Western, we see that type of activity occur. Anytime there's a large disclosure of information out there, it gets used against others. And if that information sharing doesn't occur, then we can't leverage the power of the community to protect everybody's data together. If people are being secretive about the fact that they may have had a breach, we can't share that information and can't use it to protect other systems and keep it from spreading. With the GDPR, we had a very similar thing where a guest, had a stay booked out in the future who wanted his information or her information forgotten, and obviously you couldn't do that. The other one is with a loyalty program. I want to be forgotten, but I don't want you to lose my points.
It's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge.
So there's that trade-off there. Like, how do I forget you but maintain your points? So information sharing is key when it comes to breaches. And the other thing about encryption, things like tokenization of credit cards, is huge. And it's a big thing that a lot of places don't do that really should consider.
Absolutely, those are great points. Let's move into discussing who are the bad guys, who are the threat actors. I mean, I think we all have a perception of the bad guys from thanks to Hollywood flicks. So either they have long leather trench coats and really killer boots, or there's some kids sitting in a basement. Let's talk about that, Devin.
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, you can kind of bucket the threat actors into a few major buckets. One being the guy in his basement. Those are still out there. You'd call them script kiddies. They're not really major threats to most organizations. On the other end of that spectrum, you've got nation-state actors. So you've got North Korea, who is actually through ransomware and wire fraud and things like that, actually funding a lot of their government activities to circumvent economic sanctions. You've got Russia, who's flexing their muscle on the world stage, and lots of information around election tampering. You hear about election tampering in the U.S., but what you haven't heard about is there's at least 5 or 6 other instances of election tampering in Germany and other places. And then you've got organized crime. So organized crime is actually shifting a lot of resources to cybercrime because of the amount of money to be made. Either one of you want to take a guess at the estimated annual revenues from cybercrime? Okay, so the last stat I heard was $1.5 trillion were raked in by cyber criminals in 2018. Now, to put that into perspective, that is more than the entire illegal drug trade combined. There's virtually zero risk because they're operating in multiple different jurisdictions. The rule of international law is still an evolving space that hasn't really caught up with the reality of current technology. And that's actually roughly double the entire global revenues of the airline industry. So these are huge numbers. There's a lot of money on the line.
I mean, the proceeds of crime from cybercrime surpassed narcotics as of Q3 of last year. And when you think about it as a global epidemic, for every 50 people in the government and law enforcement that deal with narcotics, it's a ratio of about 2.5 for cyber. So the bad guys, unfortunately, are winning, they're spreading, and of course, Devin, echoing on what you said, due to jurisdictional issues, we can't even get to them. So we're a little bit behind in our legislation and our global corporation in fighting that particular crime. Matthew, what kind of cyber criminals have you seen that are trying to target the hotel industry?
So we get basically all of the above. The loyalty program has monetized value, so that's a big target. The other one that I would say is far more common across any industry and doesn't take as much sophistication is just simple phishing attacks against the C-level, whereby they're looking for somebody to make a mistake and do wire transfers. We probably get 20 to 30 phishing attacks a week. Most major organizations.
That's fairly low. That's fairly low.
Yeah. But most major organizations are, I should say, targeted at our C-level.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Campaigns or attacks?
Yeah. So, obviously when it comes to your CFO and CEO, anytime you can trick them into authorizing a wire transfer, that's, quick cash and in low effort. And you can throw that net very wide, and that's, something that occurs, on a very frequent basis. Again, and the loyalty program is the other big one that they come after in the hotel industry.
Absolutely.
One other case that does occur is they'll target the hotels directly, either to get free night stays, by impersonating someone that works at the corporate office or someone in a sales capacity saying, hey, this is Compton, hoping that based upon timing, it doesn't get validated in time and they get the stay in before. And or just attacking the hotels directly through social engineering.
Cybercrime has become a new career path out there. I fight cybercrime every single day, and sometimes I wonder why my guidance counselor told me, Daniel, stay good, right? Stay good, be on the good side. I listen to him, but sometimes there's days that you wonder. I mean, the average hacker out there makes about $100,000 a month. And this is really why cybercrime has splurred and got to the levels that it did, is because it's extremely economical and highly profitable. I mean, today on the dark web, they literally resell ransomware as a service packets for about $10,000, almost as a franchise system. And by the way, I hope everybody signed the disclaimer. I'm not encouraging everybody to go to the dark web and start their own business. You literally have a business set up in 24 hours. They'll train you, they'll give you the malware, they'll give you the load, they'll give you a way to process bitcoins, and they'll even give you a way to money launder and get it back to you in cash. And this is really what's spreading out there as an epidemic. And while you have what I call the juniors that used to sit in mommies and daddies in the basement and hack for pizza, now they have elevated their game and they're actually making some money. So you've probably seen in the news several years ago, the young fellow out of Hamilton that got busted assisting the Russians. I mean, he made about $4 million from what we know when he actually was taken. So it is becoming profitable. I think his only problem was driving a really bright blue Lamborghini in downtown Hamilton. So he was the opposite of undercover hacker, right? So he needed to lay low. But that's what we're seeing out there, and it's becoming very profitable. To echo Devin's point, when you look at North Korea, $4.7 billion in proceeds from cybercrime, ransomware, and so on. You're fueling a lot of internal programs while you have embargoes on you. So this is a lot of the new state-sponsored attacks. They're doing it because they want to gain intelligence, but also it's a revenue stream for their programs. Let's get into the fun part, the myth busting. So we always hear this funky stuff, who, where, why, and so on. There's always some questions that you hear out there from companies. I'm too small, my information is not important, I'm not a bank, I'm not a government. Why would somebody even care about my data? Guys, thoughts?
Well, I mean, any data has value, and if you look at statistics as to how long it takes for people to realize they've been breached, even though you may be small and just one hotel, you have a lot of guests that may come through on an annual basis, so that if they can compromise you and siphon off that data over the course of a year, it multiplies. And if you're not paying attention, they could do it for years and years. So while you may perceive that you're just one small location and not a big target, it can still be monetized, maybe not at the level of going after corporate, but there's also not the same level of scrutiny, the same level of controls. It's a lot harder to hack Fort Knox than it is to, hack a local credit union.
Absolutely.
So, there's that trade-off between the effort and the payoff, and they're looking for that, quick balance, that easy balance of how can I get in and out quickly and or stay in there for a long time and be undetected.
Thank you. Devin, we always hear that cybersecurity is a technology problem. Oh, as long as we have technology, we'll be okay. What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, having been on the receiving end of massive coordinated campaigns that did not go well from some pretty sophisticated attackers, that couldn't be further from the truth. At the end of the day, if you try and think of things in physical terms, so I think talking about cybersecurity is often a bit of an abstract concept. You've got bits and bytes flying across the wires, and some stuff gets in and some doesn't get out, and IT's doing something to make that happen. But if you think of the defenses that we're putting in place in terms of locks on doors, bars on windows, building walls around a compound, having security guards at the gate to check people's identity when they come in, having surveillance cameras looking for suspicious behavior. If we have, if you think about that physical world, if we have employees that are coming in and out of this physical compound, they're showing their ID badges, and they're inviting, some terrorists strapped with explosives to come on in with them, there's nothing that we can do about that. And that's really the digital analogy, that's the physical analogy to what happens in the digital world. So we entrust all of our employees and contractors with usernames and passwords and access to systems, and we let them inside of our network have access to our data because everybody wants access to all the data.
Any given time.
Exactly.
Anywhere in the world.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
And if you are, if our users, if our employees are clicking on links and opening up attachments from people that they're not expecting attachments from, opening up, we had a pilot who opened up an invoice who, like in his 20 years as a pilot at WestJet, had never received an invoice, had never paid an invoice, but he opened that invoice thinking that he needed to pay it. Well, you're basically just inviting attackers right past all of the technology that we've put in place and welcoming them into the environment. You enter your username and password into a phishing link that's sent to you. You're then handing your keys over to the attacker and welcoming them into our environment. So no, it is technology. It is cybersecurity is a people problem that is enabled by technology.
That's a great point. I mean, those emails and phishing campaigns are extremely effective. I don't know about you, but I won the lottery twice, about $150 million. And I got married 3 times to a Russian model stranded in by the train tracks. So I don't know about you guys, but it's been pretty good, right? No, great points. They do get very creative. One of the newest streams that we see out there is literally employees getting emails from their managers that says, "Hey, I got a really big problem with what you did. Please print this, come to my office. We got to have a chat about your performance." You'd be surprised, but about 98% of people will open something from their immediate boss and go and visit their office. And once you open that attachment, if you don't have the safeguards in place, that's the beginning of the puzzle. And I mean, threat actors are okay. They're no longer into the smash and grab methodology. They're now okay to spend 2, 3, 4, 8 weeks in the environment and harvest data and actually take it to the next level. Sometimes even sell it to somebody else that will implement ransomware into the organization. So they're getting very sophisticated. I always tell this funny story. There was a little bit of a bust here in downtown Toronto of an operation. It was about 8,000 square feet, 9 employees, but when you got into the office, there was really nothing but servers. So if you remember that scene from Skyfall when they entered that warehouse and all you see is computers, that's basically what it was, right in the middle of the financial district. They no longer just need people, it's also bots, computers, processing power. That is the new crime. We always hear that my data is safe because it's in a data center. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, data has to live somewhere. So, you know, there's the conventional wisdom of if it's in my facility, then I have more control over it. I have the physical controls. I can monitor who's going in and out. But, you know, quite honestly, the people that invite others in are the weakest link. So whether it's in your data center or it's in the cloud, you know, it all comes down to that security posture, because you could have, you know, heavily secured data in a very insecure location. The cloud adds some additional nuances and challenges with basically the ability to have configuration allow things to be openly accessed. Same can happen in an on-premise data center. It all comes down to the people that are securing that data, how they're configuring the devices that allow access to that data, how much access the individuals that work for the organization have access to the data. I mean, it's a people problem, not necessarily a physical location problem.
And that is a great point, Devin. I mean, you mentioned this. It's literally the human factor, right? I mean, there can be all the blinking lights in the world. We can put all the guards up front. But if we're able to fool a human and reverse engineer their actions, they're kind of useless. In your opinion, what is a recommendation you would make to everybody that are attending today, a recommendation for security?
I'd say that the single biggest thing that you can do to help out keeping your organization secure is to, I guess, to use a military term. I left that out earlier, but in my other job, I'm spent 18 years in the Canadian Army Reserve. So in the military, we would use the term situational awareness. So take a step back and think, hey, does this make sense, right? You know, if I'm in the if I'm in the HR department, should I be getting a bunch of invoices that need to be paid? When you're giving access to systems or access to data, take a step back and think, hey, wait a minute, do I really need to open this up to the whole world, or do I maybe just need to share it with Daniel going forward? So an interesting stat from Gartner, leading technology researcher, they're estimating that in 2020, that between 80 and 90% of cloud security breaches will be from human error. So misconfiguration, leaving default passwords, people sharing passwords that get compromised. Yeah, just human error.
Great points. I mean, when you look at some of the emails that are coming out there, you know, what was 5-8 years ago, bad grammar, bad language, you kind of, it's literally shooting fish in a barrel. You can see this is fake. The UPS type logo is all blurred out. I mean, they've gotten very sophisticated. They can spoof and pretend that it's your email address. So when you look at the email, actually it looks like it's coming from your next door associate, your you know, down the hall, from the executives. They have gotten very good at what they're doing. Quite the investment. Matthew, in your opinion, what is one recommendation you can make for everyone when it comes to security?
So I would iterate some of the same points. The big one is be aware, because you know what your boss's mentality is, and if he doesn't, or she doesn't send you emails and say, come to my office now, and you suddenly get it, that's out of the ordinary. So you have to be looking for those exceptions, those things that just aren't in character. The other big one is not using the same usernames and passwords everywhere you go.
I know it sounds very simple, but still about what? I think it's about 38%, according to the last stats, still use the simple 1, 2, 3. I love you. I'm the best. The puppy's name that you can view on your Facebook page. It's very easy to crack, right, with a brute force attack.
Yeah, and that helps the attackers, especially when you look at things like loyalty programs, because if those credentials are reused, between your Best Western loyalty and your WestJet loyalty, they're going to take that same username and password and then go steal those points. So by doing things like that, you're really enabling things to occur very rapidly across all your accounts. So.
Absolutely. There's always been a myth, and everybody hear about that, about the people that go into car rentals, hotels, and planes, and trying to hack the infotainment and what I call the system that is being served to them. If I can just, as we're wrapping up, 20 seconds comment on that. Is it possible? Is it real?
So yeah, a few years back, there was a threat researcher by the name of Chris Roberts, I believe it was, and he claimed that he had hacked into the flight control systems of the a United flight. Now, all of the facts that have come out from the FBI, DHS, everyone have refuted that he actually gained control to the systems. In these more advanced planes like the Boeing 787s, A380s, things like that, there are systems that are able to push data about what's happening in the planes, just for, because it's interesting to see in the in-flight entertainment system and to push to other systems. But to this point, there are no confirmed cases where someone has successfully actually taken over control of the aircraft by connecting through the in-flight entertainment systems.
Fair enough. And in closing, Matthew, your experience?
Yeah, I mean, Best Western as a brand, I can only speak to us. We have a brand standard that requires that the guest wireless is segmented physically from the back office computers. So where the credit cards and the PMS is running, that's a completely separate environment. So getting from one to the other isn't a possibility.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much. This was, I hope, very entertaining and informative for everybody. Thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.